Hello, welcome to Artist Interview. I'm your host, Jameson Baxter. Each episode, I interview an artist to highlight their work and creative process in order to inspire others to create. Today, we will hear from Meg Wagler, an artist based out of Springfield, Missouri, who is a graphic designer, illustrator, and muralist. Her work has been described as colorful, bold, striking, and uplifting. So hello, Meg. Thank you so much for joining me in this time, just to be able to hear about who you are and interview you a little bit. So thank you so much for taking this time.
Yeah, happy to be here.
Awesome. So can you just share with us a little bit about who you are, where you are based, and yeah.
Sure, yeah. So my name's Meg, and I am in the Midwest. I'm currently in Springfield, Missouri. I'm from St. Louis. So a lot of, every state has a Springfield. So it's not, I feel like Springfield, Missouri is not necessarily a well-known area, but my husband and I came here to go to college because there's actually a really great art school here at the Missouri State University, and so I chose to come down here and ended up staying. I was not a super big fan of the area when I came down, but the art community has grown exponentially since we've been here, and it's just become a really wonderful place to live. And I met my husband at art school, and we just decided to stay. So this is where we're at, and it's actually a really wonderful place to build an art career because it's right in that sweet spot of not too small, but not so big that you feel like a tiny fish in a big pond. So it's been really helpful in that way to build my career here. So I'm happy to be here, and I've been creating art. So that's me.
Awesome. Thank you, Meg. And can you share with us a little bit of what type of artist you find yourself as?
Sure, yeah. I identify most as an illustrator, or I have in the past. So my degree is actually in graphic design and illustration. And so the beginning of my career was really focused on the graphic part, because that's where you can monetize an art degree really well, right? You can come through. Okay. It's my husband now, he's nervous. But I worked as either a graphic designer or art director for about a decade, and just practice my art on the side. I think like most artists do, is it's hard to just dive in and try to get past that starving artist mentality. So you hustle really hard for a long time until you feel like you've got enough clout to make it work. So I was certainly no exception to that. So I worked as a designer and art director, and that really heavily influenced my art. So it's very bold, very colorful, very graphic. And I think over time, I just wanted to stop creating art for companies, and I wanted to start making art for myself, or at least shift the balance a little bit. So that's where I felt most comfortable, and so I really started my career in illustration. But I love painting, and so I made a goal in 2019. I said, okay, I want to paint murals this year. That's what I want my focus to be. And so I apprenticed with a local muralist here who's famous worldwide. She's really wonderful, and she kind of showed me the ropes. And I had taken classes in painting, but I just hadn't done it in a long time. So she kind of helped me get my footing back underneath me there until I kind of, felt comfortable. And so I've sort of been this hybrid just visual artist where I create paintings and murals and illustrations digitally, which is my favorite part of my career, is that it's something new every day. I'm either on-site painting, or I'm in my studio at home with my husband and my kids and drawing together, or sometimes I hole up and draw by myself. So it's, it's really wonderful to have such a wide spectrum of things.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing that. And so neat to hear how you kind of started out as far as like a career goes, and then, I would say kind of finding your confidence to be willing to, I love that, strike that balance, because I know in the art world, yeah, there's a little bit of that. Like if you really want to make it, quote unquote, as an artist, you have to be willing to, I've heard some people refer to it as selling your soul and making art for other people, but then deep down, I think we all want to make the art we want to make. So I love that you're able to find that. That's awesome.
Yeah.
So Meg, why would you say you make art?
I think, well, and it kind of piggybacks off of that answer, right? I think everyone is an artist. Everyone has some version of self-expression. It may not be painting, or it may not be, music or whatever. Maybe it's cooking, maybe it's crafting, whatever. But I think we all have this, as humans, have this inherent sort of need to express ourselves. And I think if you identify as an artist and you really lean into that creative living, the need just grows and grows and grows in you to want to share and to need to share. And so you sort of, I don't think losing sight is the right verbiage, but I think it becomes indistinguishable whether or not you need or want to share your art. It's a form of expression. It's a form of therapy. It's a form of connecting with other humans. It's a form of social connection. I think it's all of those things. And the way I started my career, having gone to art school, you're exposed to a lot of ideologies of what art can be and how it can influence and how it can change, insights, and how it can, really shape the way we look back at history during certain time frames, right? We see pop art and postmodern art, and we see, Renaissance art. And so you kind of identify certain times of history with art styles. And so as a student, you kind of dream up these big ways that you can leave your mark on the world, and then you take a job that helps you kind of dive into society and make money and become a contributing citizen. And I think that you can absolutely do that in creative ways that don't, sell your soul, like you mentioned. I think that that's absolutely possible. And it's really interesting psychology to incorporate art into marketing and into our everyday lives. But for me, I think over time, it just didn't end up being what I wanted it to be, what I pictured. I started becoming less interested in the outcome. Every project that would go by, it kind of felt too repetitious, and I didn't feel like it was me, creating the art. I felt like it was kind of systematic and very formulaic. And I think that over time that started to bother me a lot more than it originally did. I kind of told myself it's still art, it feels, and it was interesting. It was science, it was social science. And so that part of it I think is really cool, but it just wasn't fulfilling to me. And I felt a really strong desire to connect socially with people through art, right? So to do that, there are a lot of social issues and social impact aspects that I really wanted to speak to. And I just felt like in the age of social media, it's hard to use words sometimes, at least for me, to get through to people. And for me, art it quickly registers, it quickly impacts, and it quickly starts a conversation so that people don't feel like they have to read a blog post or read a long, soapbox kind of thing. And so you can say a lot with a little, and it resonated with me, and that's why I kind of stuck with that route.
Thank you. So you mentioned, if you identify as an artist, the more you lean into that, the more that desire to create kind of becomes stronger. So how long would you say you have been creating? I know you talked about your career, but like how long has that identity as an artist been kind of cultivating in you?
My kids just asked me this question not that long ago, and I think it sort of depends on how you define what an artist is, right? So I've been paid to create art since 2011 when I graduated college. And so in some shape, form, or way, I've been paid to create art for about a decade. Um, but I would say you're an artist through art school, right? So you're creating art every day, you're learning the trade, you're trying new things. And so then it goes back to 2007. But then, as a kid, I was always drawing. I had a big family and a lot of family. We did not have a super stable household. My parents got divorced. I had a lot of siblings. We were moving around. And so art was the way that I kind of dealt with a lot of that. And so I drew a ton and I painted and I really leaned into my imagination. And so for me, I feel like I've always been an artist. It just was kind of figuring out a way to make it official as a professional artist. Nobody's going to pay a 6-year-old to create a tissue box, diorama. But if I did that now, I'm sure, we could leverage some way to make it.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thanks for sharing that. So how did you become interested in where you are at with the art you make, like as a visual artist, as a hand letterer, as a muralist? Can you pinpoint when that happened for you?
I think that, so the caveat here is that I don't think you have to go to art school to be an artist. I think that you can absolutely be self-taught, for lack of a better term, which I feel like is even still weird. You don't really teach yourself art. It's just expressing and kind of being comfortable with what comes out of you. But I do think for me, I had so much I guess I lacked clarity on where I wanted to go with it. And so for me, going through art school was extremely eye-opening in all of the possibilities, all the different styles of art that are considered viable forms of art, right? So, and of course, right now that's expanding daily, right? So before, now you can design apps, and that didn't exist before I entered art school. And there's a whole field of UX design that really is an art form. And you're commissioning illustrations for these kinds of things, and that didn't exist. And looking at modern forms and taking typography classes and studying a lot of different forms of typography, really, I just nerded out on that in college. I loved it. It was exactly the right combination of organic and structure. So with typography, it has to be readable. So it has to follow some kind of form, which gives me the perfect amount of structure, but I can create within that. And so I love messing around with letters, and I love that's my sweet spot. Is I have a little bit of direction to work with, but I get to do it my way, So I took an immediate liking to typography, and I think that kind of influences the rest of my work. I think you can tell that I love organic flowing lines, but I always do it with a really tight composition. And so it's kind of always studying that balance of, push and pull, I guess.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much. So can you talk a little bit about your creative process? So if you don't mind sharing, what does a typical project, I mean, that's kind of a hard thing sometimes to say, but think of a project of you that you've had, and just walk us through kind of the beginning stages of it and then what the end stage kind of looked like for you.
Yeah. So I think this varies based on what kind of project, right? So I just finished a mural last week that typically how those work is I'll be approached for a job and they'll say, hey, we have a wall and we want it to be something colorful and uplifting, and that's what you get. That's your prompt. And so which I love, because that's that little bit of structure, and then you can do it, work however you want within it. And so I go and I mock something up digitally, and I kind of or sketch, and I draw it out, and then I take it to them. We kind of make tweaks as needed, and then I get the paint together and hit the wall for however many days is necessary, and then you wrap it up. But for my personal projects, it's much different than that. It's not nearly as regimented and cut and dry. And I suspect a lot of artists are this way, that when a client gives you a project, it's all business, right? Even if it's creative, you know that you have deadlines, you know that you have these incremental milestones to hit. And I think that's really helpful. When it's personal projects, you meander all over the place. It's like, well, okay, so for a painting, a lot of times, and I reference back to it all the time, I'll have these kind of spurts of inspiration or ideas, and it might be at like 2 a.m, where I can't sleep and I have this idea. I'm like, oh, I need to write that down. And so I'll get out my sketchbook and I have kind of a list going of ideas, but I also have these little thumbnail sketches that I don't want to forget, so I make a little thumbnail sketch real quick. And I'm glad I do, because a lot of times I'll go back through and I'm like, oh, I totally forgot about this concept. I could totally do this. And some of them are garbage, or maybe I think they're garbage now, and then a year from now I'll revisit and think they're worthwhile. But then I'll get started and just rethink it over and over. I'm like, well, maybe I don't want to do this color, and so I'll repaint over the base layer, and I might get done and decide to scrap it, and so then I paint something over it, or so I feel like it's a really not cut and dry process in that regard. But to try to offset some of that, I, at least last year, all throughout 2019, because I know that about myself, because I know that I'll meander all over the place with painting. My illustrations, I say, okay, I'll do one core illustration a week where I spend a lot of time and energy on developing something a little more complex. But on the daily basis, I set aside 1 hour to do a quick spot illustration. And I say I have an hour and I have to be done by then. And it really helps keep me from overthinking it, because I just, and a lot of times that's what I end up sharing on social media, or with that clients end up liking more when they're kind of referencing back to, oh, we really like these styles. Can you make it look like this? They're almost always the ones that I did within an hour, which is really, it's, kind of wacky that it works out that way, because you're not overthinking it, and you're in your own head. You kind of just create something. You take the idea out and you put it on paper or digital media or whatever it is, and you put it out into the world. And so that's probably, I know that meanders around your question, but it really, I try to keep a couple different versions of process at play, because I think that helps me stay creative, instead of always the same process. I think I would get burnout. And so for me personally, I think it helps to have these different avenues that I take and do them a little bit differently.
That's awesome. Thank you so much. Yeah, it's always neat to hear how artists what their process is, because I think a lot of times it looks different based on the environment we're in or what kind of artists we are. But I think there's a lot of similarities to creative process. Like I totally identify with the meandering, and the, if you do set small parameters that can help focus you. So when you talk about, meandering or overthinking something, I think that can sometimes lead to excuses as to why not to continue with something or why not to do art. So what would you say to someone who says, oh, I'm no artist, I can't do that? Or they might make something and then they're like, you know what, that's no good, and they just stop. What would you say?
I would love to have coffee with this person and talk more with them. But if I had to, I taught for a few years. I taught college in our art and design course, and I have worked with, in the field with professionals, and now I have kids, and so I feel like I've kind of seen the same themes in all different ages of people, and it's always self-doubt, and it's something that we all struggle with in some form, because especially now in a time of history where you can hop on Pinterest or hop in the car and see all these billboards of gorgeous marketing art, and you are exposed to an oversaturated amount of visual stimulation always. And so I think it's really hard to be confident that your art is as good as anything you're seeing. Where I think that, 100 years ago that self-doubt absolutely still existed. But it's strange now. It's a strange time to dive into that. And I think when I was painting last week, I was painting a mural on site, and a woman, it's one of my favorite things to do, to paint on site somewhere, because people come up and they are so inspired by it, and they just want to talk to you and get a feel for they want to watch and they want to see your process. And it just kind of renews this sense of, oh, this is why I share that, people really respond to this kind of stuff. And even if it's just an easy, typography mural or whatever, people really respond to it. And the woman was watching me, and she said, man, I wish I was this talented, which is really special to hear that. And my knee-jerk response was the same one that I have with my son, because he's very hard on himself always. And I said, everyone is talented. It just depends on which talent you lean into, right? And it's about finding your voice. And I feel like that's a really overused, suggestive advice, but there's so much truth into, no matter what age you are, listening, finding enough stillness to listen to what your voice is. And that also, it can change. It doesn't mean that right now might look different than if you studied art in, let's say you're in your 40s or 50s, and you used to study art or you used to practice art in your 20s, and now you want to get back into it because you remember the feeling of how special that was, but, well, I just haven't done it in so long, I probably, it's probably no good, or whatever. Your place in time and your experience is so much different now than it was then. Your style of painting may be totally different. And it may take you a minute to get in that groove, or if it's cooking, or if it's quilting, or if it's drawing with pencil, or if it's digital art, or whatever makes you feel good about getting some kind of idea or some kind of thing out into the world. You just have to be vulnerable enough and okay with being vulnerable enough to work through that process of finding whatever it is, and also being okay with being bad at it for a little bit,
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you. I love the idea of finding your voice. I agree with you. You know, people might think, oh, that's an overused phrase, but when you kind of set the context like you did for that, you know, and being still and truly listening to what the stirring is that might be inside you, oh, that's good stuff. So thank you.
Yeah.
What,
Yeah, yeah.
is there anything else you want to share with us about who you are as an artist or your work? We'll look at your art in a little bit.
Yeah, you know, I think I would um just encourage that vulnerability to anybody who, you know, I think chances are if someone's listening to these, or if you're a student, or if you're um you know, wanting to dive into art, there are two things that I would love to normalize. The first one is you don't have to be a starving artist. I would love to normalize that not being reality. Um, and I think that it just comes down to finding value in yourself and finding value in creating, because society needs art in whatever form you're willing to bring to it. And I think there's absolutely value in that monetarily and socially, and it's absolutely possible to make a living from it. And you just have to find the groove to, to get there. And so it's possible. And the second thing is, there's never going to be a time, even when you're 10 years into your career or whatever, there's never going to be a time that you're going to say, now I'm an artist, you know, because I feel like that's something we always do as well. Once I get my first job, or once I get my first publication piece, or once I get, you know, once I make this dollar amount on a project, you know, or whatever it is, or once I get booked by the New York Times, or, you know, once I, whatever your goal is, there's always something. And then once you reach that, there's always this imposter syndrome kind of sitting on your shoulder. Even if you are super confident, there's always this voice of, well, but I'm still not there in these ways. And so now I need to reach these goals. And I think that that's great in one hand, because it helps you evolve and it helps keep you, you know, interested in what you're doing and kind of reaching. But I just want to normalize, the process, right? And the journey, because that's part of what makes an artist is, and a human is experiencing and being present now, and just kind of being content and still with where you're at in the process, and enjoying that, and knowing that you won't still be here in a year, you know, or whatever here is for you. You could keep the same style for the next 40 years, but you'll always evolve something about it. Or in my case, I have wrapped in all these different verticals of what I love doing, and in some ways it's lost a bit of following, because people are like, I'm creating too many different kinds of things, and so I don't have a niche, you know. But it's true to me to be wild and all over the place. And so if that's you, or if it's you to be really consistent, or whatever that voice is, if you just lean into it, then you'll find your groove, and you'll find your following, and you're just content pleasure, I guess, with creating. And if you lean into it, then you'll be happy with it.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Meg. I so
Yeah.
appreciate the time you took to share about you and your art, and especially just the inspiration to create. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate you helping inspire people. So thank you.